What's up, and welcome back to another episode of Keeping Up with the Commanders. I'm your host, Mason Kenahan, and today we are breaking down the 2025 NFL Scouting Combine. We're going to be looking at standouts on both sides of the football. I'm also going to talk about the Deebo Samuel trade a little bit. I know I did an emergency pod on it to give my immediate reaction. That pod is out now if you want to listen to it on all platforms, of course, but I kind of want to dive into it a little bit deeper and look at what's next after the Deebo Samuel trade and how it affects the offseason. So I'm also going to be talking about that a little bit, and then just some other rumors coming out of Indianapolis that I've heard so far regarding what Washington could do this season, this offseason within the draft at 29, and what kind of the vibes are like around the clubhouse right now. So with that being said, let's just jump right into some of the offensive standouts coming out of Mobile. Washington, of course, a big need at wide receiver. Now, with Deebo Samuel, we'll talk more about that in a little bit, but with the Deebo Samuel trade, what will Washington do in terms of will they still use a day 2, day 1 pick on a wide receiver, or will they want to kind of stick with what they got and maybe add another free agent once the free agency open talking period opens? So I'm still just going to talk about some of the wide receivers because some of them had very impressive performances. We're going to start with Texas wide receiver Matthew Golden. Matthew Golden is one of my favorite prospects in the class. He was not at the Senior Bowl, but he's out of Texas. I know there's a lot of talk about Isaiah Bond coming into this 2024 college football season, but Matthew Golden was the one transferred from Houston to Texas, had a breakout year last year, especially down the stretch of the season. I was very impressed with him, what I saw on film. Sticky, strong hands, can come down with anything. Impressive catch radius. He's only listed at 5'11", 195 pounds, which is 32nd percentile and 34th percentile as at his position. So he's a smaller wide receiver, below average in terms of size, but he still has a very impressive catch radius and can reach up and grab a lot of passes thrown his way, which I really like. His acceleration and deceleration is impressive, and that was really evident, or I guess his acceleration was really evident in Indianapolis because he ran a 4.29 40-yard dash, which was the fastest out of any wide receiver. He ran, I believe, a 4.31, and then followed it up on his second attempt with a 4.29, which was very impressive for Matthew Golden. I knew he was fast, but I did not expect him to be sub 4.3 fast, which is insane. So it was very impressive in terms of what Matthew Golden brought to Indianapolis. He showed a lot of what I expected from him. And again, he's like a vertical threat downfield, but he also was able to, his yak is also a little bit impressive as well. So I loved what I saw from Matthew Golden. I know Washington now traded for Deebo Samuel and you have Terry McLaurin, but if Washington is still looking at somehow getting a vertical threat, maybe they don't want to spend a first-round pick on a wide receiver, so that could take out Matthew Golden in this conversation because at the end of the day, I think Matthew Golden is a back end of the first-round type of player where I think he is going to go on day 1, especially after a performance like this in Indianapolis. But let's just say he is on the board at 29, and Washington is looking to get another weapon to pair with Terry and Deebo. Matthew Golden would be someone I would take over a guy like Luther Burden, for example. So Golden is going to be my wide receiver 2 in this class behind Tet McMillan. I'm not going to count Travis Hunter in this. I think he's more of a cornerback. But in terms of just true wide receivers, I think Golden is the second best receiver in this class. And if he does fall to Washington at 29, I would not be entirely opposed to taking him, even though they just traded for Deebo Samuel still. But even if Deebo Samuel wasn't on this team, I think Golden would definitely be an option at 29 if he did fall. Quick reaction time as well with the ball in his hands. I mentioned how he had that breakout year last season, 987 yards and 9 touchdowns for Golden, which is really impressive. He fluid hips, smooth route runner, in my opinion. I just think sometimes with him, if you want to look at some of the weaknesses, he can go out and make these incredible catches, especially for his size. His vertical was great as well. And I mean, he didn't work out on the field, I believe, after running at 4.29, which he didn't really need to because he showed off his speed there. But he does have a little bit of a drop problem, a 6.5% drop rate last season. And so there is a little bit of a drop problem for Matthew Golden in terms of some of these easier things, easier catches to make. But he can make the tough ones, and that is what I loved about Golden. So I was really impressed with him throughout his time in Indianapolis. Just looking at the other wide receivers in terms of their 40 times, Dante Thornton, 4.3, Jameer DK at 4.34, which really surprised me. As a Florida guy, I did not expect DK to run in the low 4.3s. I thought he was more of kind of a high 4.3s. Maybe he would probably break 4.4, but running a 4.34 for DK was really impressive. If you want to look at a guy, I mentioned how if Washington may not want to be willing to spend a day one or day two pick on a wide receiver, DK could be someone that they would look at sometime on day three. I think I'd be shocked if DK goes in the first 3 rounds, but it would be because of these performances. He was impressive as well in the All-Star circuit and now here in Indianapolis as well. So DK was the third fastest. Jalen Lane was also tied with him at 4.34. Arian Smith out of Georgia, 4.36. And then Northern Virginia's very own Ty Felton ran a 4.37. So those are some of the top guys. Isaiah Bond, I know there's a lot of talk about him. Probably heard by now, ran a 4.39. So just broke 4.4, which is not bad at all. But of course, he was saying and bragging that he was going to break Xavier Worthy's 4.21 or 22, whatever he ran record. So he did not do that. But Bond is someone who I think has definitely fallen off players' draft boards a little bit, or teams' draft boards a little bit. And just because he had a down year last year, only 500 yards, I believe, or 600 yards production-wise, after transferring over from Alabama, plus the rise of Matthew Golden transferring from Houston to Texas as well, kind of made Golden take a larger role in that offense that maybe Bond was expecting for himself. So it was impressive what Golden has been able to do for the Longhorns last season and then at Houston as well over his time there. So those are some of the receivers that kind of stood out to me. Offensive lineman was also the other position I kind of wanted to focus on. I'm not really going to talk about quarterbacks that much because, of course, Washington doesn't really need a quarterback right now, but they do need some offensive linemen. Armand Membo, a guy who's going to go in the first round, probably won't be on the board for Washington at 29, but someone I know Washington doesn't really have a lot of draft picks right now, but if they were in the market to trade up, a guy like Membo would be someone they would probably trade up for. 98th percentile performance on the relative athletic score metric system, which I mentioned in the Scouting Combine preview episode about how that is kind of calculated, how that works and everything. You want to be high. You want to have a high number, with the highest, of course, being 100th percentile. That means that you are the most athletic out of anyone at your position throughout the course of, I think the guy's been doing it for about 30 years or so. So Armand Membo, 98th percentile performance. Ariante Ursary is someone who I think could fall out of the first round in Washington. It could be in play for Washington with that second round pick. Ursary, a big tackle out of Minnesota. He was at the Senior Bowl. He had a solid performance, but wasn't anything crazy at the Senior Bowl. 99th percentile performance from him, so very impressive athletically what he could bring. He was a big guy moving in that 40-yard dash as well. I was really impressed with him there. Will Campbell is someone who Washington definitely won't be in position to land, because Campbell is most likely going to go in the first 10 picks, and he's probably going to be the first offensive lineman off the board. But Campbell, 98th percentile performance for him. So some of these guys like Josh Connolly, Calvin Banks, who could be in play at 29, both in the upper quartile as well with their performances. So offensive linemen, especially, you want them to be high on the athletic score metrics, because historically, if you are in the 90th percentile plus as an offensive lineman, you are in a good position to succeed in the NFL. So especially now, because you go up against some of these speedier edge rushers, especially the ones like Membo or Ursary, who are in Connolly as well, who are going to maybe try out at tackle first before moving inside to guard. Those guys are going to have to move their feet and be athletic on the outside, going up against an Abdul Carter or someone like that, where you've got speed. You may be a smaller pass rusher now than what it was before, but you make up for that with your speed. And so guys like Membo, Ursary are going to have to move their feet at the NFL level. And this athleticism metric that they use is definitely helpful in determining who's going to be able to kind of match up against some of these more athletic edge rushers and pass rushers in the NFL. So those were some of the guys that stood out on the offensive line. One player that I think had a not so great not so great offensive lineman workout was Tyler Booker, the guard out of Alabama. A 40th percentile performance from him. But Booker is considered one of the best true guards. Maybe you can move him to center as well. He's got great size in this class, but it would be the first time since 2019 that a first rounder would be used on a prospect with an under 50th percentile performance if a team were to take Tyler Booker in the first round, which is interesting because Booker has been getting a lot of hype lately, especially with his measurements. I'm recording this on Sunday, so when he measured in this morning or when the measurements were released, a lot of people liked him. It was great size for a guard, and some people want to move him to center as well. He'd be the largest center, as someone said in NFL history. So he's got great size for those positions, but just workout wise and measurements wise, it didn't really work out for him. So 40th percentile performance, but you never know. You look at a guy like Gunnar Helm out of Texas, the tight end, who had a not so great workout, but apparently he sprained his ankle on his 40-yard dash false start or something. So that kind of also played a role because he still worked out even though he had a sprained ankle, which was insane to me. And I don't know if people have seen the pictures of it online, but it's a pretty badly sprained ankle. So maybe it's a situation like that for Tyler Booker. So you never really know, maybe dealing with an injury or something. So that was just one that kind of stood out to me. I already mentioned Josh Connolly and Kelvin Banks, two guys that could be in play for Washington at 29 if they were to go offensive line. Two guys who I think both of them could definitely play tackle in the league. Connolly was the offensive lineman of the week, practice player of the week down in Mobile. And Kelvin Banks, he did not participate in an all-star game. So those are kind of where both of those guys stand. Both of them are probably going to be mid to late first rounders. Connolly or Banks maybe could sneak into the second round, but I expect both of them to go in the mid to late first round. So those were the offensive guys. Let's switch over to the defensive side of the ball. I want to start with Kentucky cornerback Maxwell Hairston because he ran the fastest 40 time of the week at a 4.28. Mel Kiper actually had him. Mel Kiper, the ESPN NFL draft analyst, been doing it for a very long time now. He actually had Hairston being drafted by the Washington Commanders in his pre-combine mock draft. A lot of people, when I posted about that on Twitter, a lot of people were very against it. People were saying, "Oh, either these were the arguments being made. Either one, I don't want to take another Kentucky player in the first round, which goes back to Jamin Davis in 2021 when he was out of Kentucky, or two, he looks like Emmanuel Forbes." So those were the two arguments going against that pick. But I actually think Hairston is a really solid corner for Kentucky and someone I don't know if I would take. I think cornerback, I would rather go with a guy like Savon Ravel or Benjamin Morrison at 29. If those guys were on the board, I think it'd be a little bit of a reach just because some of these other cornerback prospects I like for Washington at 29. But again, he's still a very good player, and I would spend the day 2 pick on him. So Hairston is someone I wanted to talk about. Another guy is someone who really showed out at the Senior Bowl about a month ago in Mobile. He was there for a couple practices before being caught leaving early. But Shamar Stewart out of Texas A&M, the edge rusher, stands 6'5", I believe 6'6", very athletic guy. Followed up a good Senior Bowl practice or a couple good Senior Bowl practices with very impressive workout in Indianapolis. He was in the 98th, 99th percentile athlete as well. Same with some of these other guys. I believe Hairston was in the 90th plus as well. So a lot of these guys that stand out are, of course, high up in the relative athletic score metric system. Stewart, I think, though, is going to be a top 10 pick when it's all said and done. Stewart is someone who not only impressed scouts a ton at the Senior Bowl, but then followed it up with a very athletic performance at the scouting combine just this past week. Stewart was out there, I believe. Defensive lineman went out there on Friday, I want to say. Maybe it was Thursday. It was either Thursday or Friday, but he was one of the first standouts. I believe it was Thursday now I'm thinking about it. But he was very impressive and someone that would be great. It's someone that I would for sure select if I was Washington at 29. Maybe a trade up target, but I just don't see a world where he falls that far to 29 at this point. I thought it was great. It's a great project. You could say he's a project guy, but also just his athleticism and just overpowers people. Great run stopper on the edge, which Washington needed. So I had him going to 29, I believe, in one of my mock drafts about a month or two ago, but there's no chance he gets to 29, in my opinion, now at this point. So that's another guy that impressed me. And then South Carolina safety Nickeman Worry was a 100th percentile athlete. So he ranked number one in the last 30 or so years with where he stood. A 6'3", 220-pound corner was, ranked number one, arm length 32.5 inches. Ran a 4.4 40-yard dash, 43-inch vertical, 11-foot broad jump as well, 11.5-foot broad jump, if I'm reading that correctly as well. So this guy was one of the best performances at the combine out of anyone, out of any position. Nickeman Worry is someone who I think was a early day 2 pick before the combine, but could definitely be in the first, find himself in the first round when it's all said and done as well. I think Nickeman Worry would be a great replacement for a guy like Jeremy Chin. If Washington and Adam Peters don't want to re-sign a guy like Chin, and Chin is getting a lot of money offered from elsewhere, because again, it is March 2nd as I'm recording this. Is coming out on March 3rd. Washington is yet to re-sign a guy like Chin. So there's a good chance Chin hits free agency in a couple of weeks. But if Chin does leave, and Worry could be someone that replaces him, I think selecting him at 29 could definitely be a move for Washington. Would be an Adam Peters, Dan Quinn-like move as well. And Worry can play high, he can play in the box as well. Very physical safety. I like him a lot, so would not be mad at the pick if I was a Washington fan. But yeah, that was pretty much the scouting combine. Some standouts on both sides of the ball. I do want to dive into the Deebo Samuel trade a little bit, talk about this some more, because I gave my immediate reaction in the emergency pod that came out on Saturday night. But I want to dive into this a little bit more because I mentioned it already when talking about some of these wide receivers. But this move gives Washington a lot more flexibility and within their first couple of picks. Because before, you looked at a receiver room as Terry and who else? And so 29 could have been a wide receiver. Whatever the other one we have, 50-something, whenever our next pick is, could have been a wide receiver. But I think it gives them some more flexibility to wait to select a wide receiver on day 3. Washington currently has 6 draft picks in this class, one through the first 3 rounds, and then 2 in the 6th, and then 1 in the 6th and 2 in the 7th, I believe. So there's a big gap between 4th and 5th round. I don't think Washington has any draft picks because they have a first round pick, their own second round pick, the Dolphins' third round pick, so not even their own, the Dolphins' third round pick, and then a 6th round pick that's, I believe, the Saints, I want to say, and then 2 7th round picks, one of them belonging to Philly and one of them belonging to Pittsburgh somehow. It's a little bit confusing when it gets to those 7th round picks, but at the end of the day, Washington has 6 first round picks, 3 of them in the first 2 days, and then 3 of them on the 3rd day. So Adam Peters, a guy who, praises himself on building through the draft and kind of describes himself as a GM who wants to build through the draft. He only has 6 picks in a 7-round draft. You gotta wonder if Jonathan Allen in a trade like that would have some implications on adding more picks, because Deanna Rossini from The Athletic, not ESPN anymore, from The Athletic, that she said Jonathan Allen was discussed in a trade for Deebo Samuel, but Jonathan Allen's, $19 million cap hit, $20 million cap hit or something like that next year was an issue for Washington. That doesn't mean that Washington is not going to be able to trade a guy like Jonathan Allen. I still think a Jonathan Allen trade gets done before the draft. And again, don't expect much for him. I would expect probably the same what we got for Deebo Samuel. I'd probably expect a 5th round pick, maybe even a 6th round pick at this point for a guy like Jonathan Allen. But it would give Adam Peters some more draft picks in this class. So you got to wonder when a Jonathan Allen trade is going to happen, because I would expect that to probably be done at some point in the draft, before the draft, maybe in the next 2 weeks leading up to free agency. But this Deebo trade is great for Washington, in my opinion. I know people saying he's washed. He hasn't had a 1,000-yard season in 40 years. He's only had one 1,000-yard season in his career. I don't think Washington is going to ask him to have a 1,000-yard season. That's not what he's going to be asked to do anymore. The expectations for Deebo in San Francisco was to be that number one guy, especially with Brandon Ayuk hurt for a good portion of the last 2 years. Deebo Samuel was expected to be that number one guy. Now, some of these injury concerns is probably the thing I'm most worried about, is him staying healthy. But saying that he hasn't had a 1,000-yard season and will never be a 1,000-yard season in the rest of his career, I don't think that's what Washington is looking for in a guy like Deebo Samuel. I think if Deebo can give him 700 total yards, 800 total yards, which he had over 800 total yards and 4 touchdowns last year, if he can get that touchdown number up a little bit and then have like 800 yards again, that is perfectly fine with me. And I would consider that a steal for a guy you trade a 5th-round pick for. So I think the expectations for Deebo should be a little bit lower than what some fans, I know those fans are mostly coming from outer fan bases, but are expecting. But I still think it's a great trade for Washington. And I think it gives Cliff Kingsbury a lot of flexibility of what he can do with Deebo in the backfield, Austin Eckler, Brian Robinson, maybe another running back they ultimately somehow acquire in the free agency or in the draft or through trade as well. So I think there's still a lot of options for Washington with Deebo Samuel and Jonathan Allen as well. I think Allen trade gets done. So I would say that this was still a great trade for Washington. And I know it sounds like a restructure is not happening. Washington is looking to keep Deebo on the team for multiple seasons, which also kind of worries me a little bit. But at the end of the day, looking at the big picture, it's a great trade for the Commanders and what they're trying to do with their offense and what their weaknesses were last season. So I would look forward to that. I think it also opens up the middle of the field for Washington in terms of what Deebo can bring with his crossers, his dig routes, and all of that as well, not just the screen stuff that he runs. So I'm looking forward to this trade and what Deebo can bring to this offense from the Washington Commanders. So let's move on to the final topic here in this week's episode of Keeping Up with Commanders. It's just I want to kind of talk about some other rumors happening in Indianapolis. Of course, you get a lot of reports because the entire NFL world is together. All of the GMs, all of the coaches, or most of them, are all in Indianapolis, all in the same place at the same time. And that's kind of what accelerated the Deebo Samuel trade to happen this weekend, I believe, because Adam Peters and the 49ers front office were all in the same building at the same time. So it's a lot easier to contact them there and discuss trades and things like that when you're in person rather than over a phone and through text messages and all that too. So some other rumors I'm hearing, or of other people reported as well, Tennessee edge rusher James Pierce Jr. is someone who could fall in the draft. I think there are some people are reporting that there's some character concerns with him, which is interesting because I'm still yet to watch Pierce. That's my next watch. I'm watching Abdul Carter right now. But Pierce is someone who could be in play for Washington with the 29th overall pick. If Washington does end up going edge rusher, I know multiple mock drafts and multiple people have projected James Pierce to land with Washington. I know it's still kind of early, a month, 2 months almost, still until the NFL draft, but James Pierce is a name that has been tied to Washington a good amount. Also Odighizuwa, the Cowboys defensive tackle that many Washington fans were kind of pointing at a guy who's entering free agency or was going to enter free agency in a couple of weeks, someone that Washington could trade for, or not trade for, but sign to a multi-year contract if they were to trade away Jonathan Allen or Daron Payne. Odighizuwa, it sounds like, is going to get the franchise tag from Dallas, which is about $25 million, which, in my opinion, is not worth it for a guy like Odighizuwa, but it sounds like they're going to discuss a multi-year extension with him as well. So there's still things getting figured out there, but it doesn't sound like Odighizuwa is going to be a Washington Commander next year, which is unfortunate because he's a great run stopper, and that's what Washington needed, and that's what Washington lacked last year. And when you're in a division with guy like Saquon Barkley, who you're going to play twice a year, getting a good run stopper would definitely be pretty important. So that is pretty much it, though, for this episode of Keeping Up with the Commanders. The NFL Combine is a wrap in Indianapolis, and from now on, I mean, we're full steam ahead for the NFL Draft. Free agency starts in 2 weeks, which means I'm excited because next week is probably going to be one of my favorite episodes I've ever done on this podcast. I'm going to be doing a full mock offseason for the Washington Commanders. Adam Peters might have already kind of gotten a head start on that offseason that compared to myself because he traded for Deebo Samuel. But I'm excited. I'm going to be doing a full 7-round mock draft. I'm going to be doing free agency signings, looking at Washington's cap space, maybe sneak in a trade or two as well to help bolster this Washington team and turn them into a team that can make a deep run, that can consistently make a deep run in the playoffs and have a shot at the Super Bowl. So, and take that next step really with Jane Daniels as the quarterback. So I'm looking forward to that. That'll be a fun episode. I'm also looking to get some more guests on as well over the course of the draft season because that's probably the best time to get guests on before the draft in April, which I'm looking forward to as well. So it's going to be a great draft season. Subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, or you can follow it on Spotify, Apple Podcast, wherever you get your podcast. You can listen or watch Keeping Up with the Commanders, hosted by myself, Mason Kenahan, every week over the offseason. We'll be dropping episodes every Monday. And then, of course, reaction episodes to things to signings, to NFL draft selections, to Washington picks in the first round, if they pick in the first round at all, and some other stuff as well. So I'm looking forward to that. It's going to be a pretty fun offseason here on Keeping Up with the Commanders. But with that being said, thank you for watching or listening to this week's episode of Keeping Up with the Commanders. See you guys in the next one. Peace.